you want to either create a sense of strong desire or total fear, because you have to grab the reader. And so you can't just go like, wouldn't it be nice to be number one on Google? It's like, you have to be like, I'll never forget waking up to 1,000 emails, being in a total state of panic or whatever. Like, there needs to be some sense of, oh my gosh, there's something really on the line, almost to the point where it feels like there could be a career death or an actual death. It's a huge, terrifying thing.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It's my pleasure to have Charlie Hoehn with us. Charlie is the best-selling author of Play It Away, which Tony Robbins called the cure to your stress. Charlie's articles on Play have been read by over 5 million people. He's also an expert on how to get a book to become a true bestseller and potentially even sell millions of copies. I met him in 2010 at an event of Tim Ferriss's called Opening the Kimono, which Tim charged $10,000 to attend, and Charlie was the organizer of that event for Tim. Charlie, it's so great to have you on the show.
Love talking with you, Stephan. Thanks for having me, man.
First of all, if you could share your origin story, your superhero origin story with our listener of how you ended up with such a powerful network and making such a big difference in the world already, and with huge things yet to come.
It really started in 2008 when, right before the recession hit, I was kind of planning on leading the typical college graduate life. That was the year I graduated. So going into, I can't remember which month, but I was like, well, I'm just going to take a job at this ad agency that I'd interned for, and they really liked me. So I feel like I'll be able to get a starting salary of at least $40K a year and maybe 50. And I'll be working on ads with people I like and whatnot. And then, of course, the recession hit. That agency started laying people off like crazy and eventually even shut down for a while. And so that plan didn't work. And so I spent months sort of applying to jobs the traditional way, right? Of get on a job board, send in a resume, send in a cover letter, rinse and repeat. And they didn't have one-click applications. So I think I applied to like 100 jobs over the course of a couple months, right? And I remember kind of checking in and realizing that of all of those applications, I'd only heard back from 2. And one of them was a pyramid scheme. And the other one was a manual labor company, which nothing wrong with that. But it was like, well, I didn't need to go to college to get that job. And that wasn't in the game plan, right? And I actually took that job for a little bit. And it was just like, a bunch of people tatted up, chain smokers. It was not really the type of work and culture I envisioned myself in, right?
It didn't feed your soul.
No, not exactly. I felt like no one liked each other either. So it was like, man. And so I remember laying on the ground one night in my bathroom, actually, in my parents' house, and kind of just pulling my hair out because it was like, this is the advice that my parents gave me. This is the advice professors had given me. I'd spent like 3 or 4 hours in a resume optimization workshop, and none of this stuff worked. It was really bizarre to me that it just kind of hit me like I spent 17 years kind of in this system of you increase the level and now, okay, here's the real world. Here's how to tackle it. And it just didn't work at all. I remember just sort of thinking like, okay, I'm just going to do what excites me, what I think would be exciting to do. And I'm going to do it for free. I'm not going to ask for a paycheck because no one's giving me a paycheck anyway. And that seems to be one of the big hurdles, the obstacles to working with me is, do we have to put this guy on payroll right now during a recession, right? Competing against like people 15 years older than me who are willing to take a pay cut at my rate to get the job, so I'm not going to beat them. I did a virtual internship with Seth Godin at the time. He had opened that up to hundreds of people who'd applied. And I just sort of realized, like, if I stick with this, I'll be one of the few left at the end of this. And so I stuck with that. There ended up being about a dozen of us who stuck with it over the course of that time. So that gave me a little bit of credibility boost. Then I started reaching out to authors that I thought were doing interesting work. So Ramit Sethi, who ran the blog I Will Teach You to Be Rich at the time, he was working on his first book of the same name. And I reached out, and he had happened to do an internship with Seth Godin before I did. And so we kind of connected on that front. And I said, Ramit, you're great on video, but you never do it. Like I saw some video of you. You're a professional speaker, and you don't do video. And so I suggested, why don't you give that a try? Because he was just doing writing on his blog at the time. I'll edit all your videos, and I'll kind of kickstart your YouTube channel, and we'll test it out. I sent him a sample of my work. I was like, here's a video I made, and he was like, wow, that's great. Let's do it. We started doing some videos together. The first few he got a lot of traction. Then he invited me to kind of help him with the marketing strategy for his book. I helped him kind of lead the charge in marketing his book, and his book hit #1 overall on Amazon bestseller list, beat out the Twilight series, which was a huge deal at the time. It was like, wow, we really did something special here. And we kind of created this innovative strategy that hadn't been done at the time. Those two things were the first real footholds I had. And then I kind of leveraged those into, hey, I'm going to reach out to Tucker Max and do a little bit of marketing work for free for him too. He ended up inviting me onto his nationwide movie tour, and I went around as his videographer, one of 2 videographers, and edited videos for every stop and did promotions for the movie at every stop. Quickly, I kind of gained this reputation as a guy who could like get things done and was fairly savvy with marketing. Then I had Ramit, Tucker, and one other person all independently recommend me to Tim Ferriss as like, hey, this is a guy you should work with. I started doing a bit of free work for Tim, and then he quickly was like, let's pay you, we'll do $25 an hour. And I was doing basic stuff at first, but I was looking proactively for areas where it could help his readers, or it could help enrich what he was already doing. It ended up with was Tim offering me a full-time role. I became his first full-time employee, and eventually kind of got promoted to this title we made up called Director of Special Projects, or Director of Other, basically, where I was just doing a ton of different things and just helping him with his book, his brand, his business. So I kind of became known as a guy behind the scenes. And I wrote a book called Recession Proof Graduate that just kind of laid out, like, here's the free work strategy. I saw somebody write about this morning, actually. A guy named Jack Butcher calls it the permissionless apprentice strategy, right? Which is really, I called it the free work strategy. The only difference between that and an internship or like a traditional apprenticeship is you just say, I like what this person's doing, or I like what this company's doing. I'm going to act as like an advocate or behind the scenes brand ambassador, and I'm going to enhance what they're doing. I'm not going to wait for somebody to pay me or tell me what to do. I'm just going to go do it, and I'm going to do it in a way that can only positively affect their brand. I just kept doing that, and it was interesting. One of the most fascinating conversations to me was having a conversation. A guy named Michael Ovitz reached out. Michael Ovitz is the founder of the CAA. It's the biggest talent agency in Hollywood. And then he was the CEO of Walt Disney for a while. Michael Ovitz does not have a great reputation, I'll say that. But he's an impressive guy. Like what he has accomplished, it's pretty remarkable. And he told me, I got my start the exact same way, of doing this kind of permissionless apprentice thing and just finding ways to create value for others. When I kept learning about things throughout history, like Leonardo da Vinci did this, Warren Buffett did this. It just kind of became this recurring thing that really stood out to me. I've kind of modified how I think about it now, and it's you're aiming to get paid to play. You're starting off by removing the financial motivation, and you're starting off with intrinsic motivation. What is going to be fun and exciting for you? Go do it. See how it goes. If you create value, they'll pay you eventually. That's kind of been my message, and that's my origin story, how I got started.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on all your success. And you mentioned you were an intern for Seth Godin. How did that come about?
He had posted on his blog. I was a big fan of his blog. Like, he's the reason I went into marketing. I almost quit marketing because it was like, this is just hawking products at people and manipulating them. I'm not into it. But Seth really changed my mind on it. And Seth wrote on his blog, he was looking for an intern. And so I went about creating this application that in retrospect was very cringy, right? It was way over the top and gimmicky, not substantive. And so I actually got rejected. I think he had like 4 seats, right? To come to New York and work with him in person.
For free.
I don't know if it was, I think it was for free. Yeah. But I know the people who got those seats, and they were like, it was awesome. It was amazing. Right. I did not get one of those seats, but he said, I got so many applications and I was impressed by so many. This was a hard thing to pick. Anybody who wants to do a virtual internship, it's not going to be quite the same, but anybody who wants to do a virtual internship, you're invited. And so I think it was something like a Slack channel or like a Ning community or something at the time. I joined, and I remember there were hundreds and hundreds of active people in it. All these people who were like, this is going to be great. We're going to be interns, virtual interns. And I remember thinking to myself, like, there's just no way they're all going to stick with this. Like, it's going to not be rewarding at some point, and they'll drop off. There's just no way. And so I just stuck with it every day for the summer and did a little bit of work each day and tried to collaborate with others. And then by the end of the summer, there were only like 12 of us who were still active. And so Seth messaged all of us and he said, hey, I appreciate that you guys stuck with this. I'd like to promote you on my blog. All of us put together a 1-pager in a PDF, and he posted it on his blog, and he said, these are the best of the interns I worked with this summer. And so I had a lot of companies kind of reach out. I ended up working with one, was called Kaigen, which is now known as Outward Hound. It's one of the biggest dog toy companies in the world. And so I did some marketing with them. And so that was the Seth Godin story. And what was funny is my parents at the time were like, I had promised them, if nothing works out for me, I'll work as a landman for an oil company, which is like $100,000 a year. My dad is in the oil and gas industry. So he was like, all right, that'll pay well. I can help you get that job pretty quick.
Why would you promise that?
Because I wanted kind of something like a little bit of stick to motivate me. I wanted to have some pressure of like, I got to make this work.
Okay, so you did that for you, not for them.
I did a burning the bridges move for me. I know it'll be soul crushing, but I know it's like I can also do it for a bit, get under my feet, financially. What was funny was while I was doing this, my parents had no idea who Seth Godin and Tim Ferriss and all these guys are. They're like, these are weird internet people. Good luck. And then one of their friends who was in the marketing space was like, your son did an internship with Seth Godin, after he posted it to his blog. Mm-hmm. And they were like, oh, wow, we didn't know he was like a reputable person. This is very great. I was like, yeah, Seth Godin's like a huge deal in the marketing world. Yeah.
That is awesome. And didn't Ryan Holiday take this kind of approach as a permissionless apprentice? And how did you end up meeting Ryan?
Yeah, it's funny. I was emailing him this morning.
Well, nothing's random, of course. So
right, not random at all. So Ryan and I started our careers very similarly, and he's just gone to just unbelievable heights. Ryan did the same strategy. He wanted to work with Robert Greene. I can't remember if he started working with Tucker Max, and then I think Tucker introduced him to Robert, and that's really where he learned the art of writing a best-selling book, was helping Robert as his researcher and I think his editor. But yeah, we took a very similar approach. He worked with Robert, I worked with Tim. So we were, our circles definitely overlapped many times.
Mhm.
And Ben Kaznoka as well. Ryan's very famous, right? Ben is not quite as much, but Ben took the same approach working with Reid Hoffman. And so he ended up being a co-writer on one or two of Reid's books. I know the start of You. And so Ben and I have known each other longer than Ryan and I have. And we've all kind of taken the same approach. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember Ryan was at Tim Ferriss's event. He was a speaker, right?
Yeah. He ended up being the first speaker. We weren't even planning. We invited him as a guest, but I think it was Kevin Rose. He couldn't make it. He had a death in the family, I believe, that morning. And so he was going to be our first speaker, and then he had to cancel. So we invited Ryan and Tucker to speak.
Wow. Quite a way to pivot. And when you're throwing a curveball like that.
Yeah, they helped us.
Let's circle back to how you helped Ramit with his first book. You teased us with an innovative strategy that you didn't elaborate on. What was so innovative back then?
No one had ever done a live stream before to promote a book, to our knowledge. And we did that in tandem with a pretty huge giveaway. And I think enough time has passed now that I can reveal. By the way, I'm super proud of Ramit, right? He's now the host of a hit show on Netflix, How to Get Rich. Like, it's super cool to have seen him go from where he was to where he is now. What happened was Ramit partnered up, I think, with like mint.com or something similar. And he was given a bunch of money, like $10,000 or something. And we also had some money. I think he had some money allocated from the publisher toward like Kindles and stuff, which were brand new at the time. And so it was like every hour he was giving away either a Kindle or a $1,000 check for somebody's savings account. What we didn't know is that you cannot tie a promotional giveaway like that to book purchases. Like, it is against the law to make it conditional.
You had a sweepstakes.
Yeah, exactly. So, oops, but it worked really well. And I think that's why it's illegal. So, but anyway, so I don't think we didn't know that.
Yeah.
We truly were like, oh, dang, whoops. I think somebody like live started messaging us being like, hey, you can't do this. And we're like, oh no. It was really fascinating. I can't remember. Ramit and I remember he asked me, hey, you put together what you think a good marketing plan is to launch this book, and I'll put together a good marketing plan, and we'll kind of circle up and we'll see which ones overlap. And we had a ton of overlap. And we basically just combined our ideas and said, all right, let's move this forward. I would have to look back on the actual plan, but I do remember that part where we were like, man, this is really working. And realizing after, like, oh, that's against the law.
Awesome. Okay, so you have an incredible blueprint kind of plan for success. If you have a nonfiction book and you want to sell 1 million copies, which is very hard, it's rarer than hen's teeth to get 1 million copies of your book out there in the public, but with, let's say, a category Amazon bestseller that you can achieve pretty easily through like a buyer's group and some sort of kind of gray hat strategy. So what is it about selling 1 million copies of a nonfiction book that is so elusive or difficult, so rare? And then what's your blueprint look like?
Part of the reason it's rare is a woman I know, and I think you probably know her, Anna David.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She put it really well. She was like, most people don't read. Most people don't buy books. And so the books that end up selling millions of copies tend to do so because they reach non-readers. They reach people who actually are like, all right, I'll cave because I've heard about this book so much, or it sounds immediately interesting. I think of like David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me, because it's such an immediately interesting story of the world's toughest man Here's his story. And it's a very good book. So it can carry itself, but you want to know it because you listen to Joe Rogan or whatever. Same thing with Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, right? Is like, that is an Instagram worthy cover, right? People who are non-readers can show that cover. They could show the book and like, yeah, this is who I am,
Yeah, it's like these people are creating a movement. The author and the tribe, the street team, are together creating a movement to maybe change the world or to at least make a stand for something.
Kind of the blueprint I put is there's like 9 tests, or so to speak, that I've noticed that indicate, does a book even have the potential to sell 1 million copies, right? And so like you go in the complete opposite direction, stoicism, right? Ryan's books have sold 1 million copies, but that's shocking, right? It's like stoicism. It's a contrarian movement to what is in the zeitgeist of America, or what was at the time, which was like really being emotional, caring, being undisciplined, all these things that I think people were looking for a lightning rod of the opposite direction. Same with Jordan Peterson. I think Peterson struck a nerve because it was like, things are so far this way that you bring it back to somebody who is hyper disciplined, very structured, masculine, however you want to define it, and standing up for that. People are just like, there's a mass of non-readers desperate for a lightning rod in the other direction. And so I think Anna put it best when she said the book has to reach non-readers in such a way that like they magnetize to the concept instantly. Yeah. And they can't help but hear about it and talk about it, even if they haven't bought it or read it yet.
By the way, with the 12 Rules for Life book by Jordan Peterson, is there one particular rule that just like speaks to you or jumps out to you?
I think you might be able to guess what that rule is. Would you be able to guess?
Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street.
No. Good guess, but no. I can't remember if it's like, if a kid's climbing a tree, leave them alone, or something to that effect, right? It's like, if a kid is doing something dangerous.
Oh yeah, do not bother children when they are skateboarding.
Yes, that's what it is, right? Yeah. And it's like, it's so true. And I think it's something I think about a lot is, when you become a parent, you suddenly become very risk averse and you want to protect your kids. And it's natural, right? When they're babies and stuff, it's like they can really get hurt very quickly. But you have to drop that habit at a certain point and trust that like, hey, they're okay. They have a lot of wisdom in them. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist as a species. And so they can try to do dangerous things. It's okay. So that one resonates with me a lot. And I, of course, like his first one a lot. I think it was the strongest one, which is like, clean your room. Instead of trying to change the world, why don't you take care of your own room and household first? How to sell 1 million copies of your nonfiction book. I wrote this article about 5 years ago, and I say less than 0.003% of books published will ever sell 1 million copies. This will show you what it takes to be in that 0.003%.
Yep. And I will put a link to that article in the show notes for this episode.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I try to rank them in order of importance, right? Of like, how should you tackle your book as you're planning it out and thinking about this? And test number 1, I think, is the most important, is your book insanely valuable, right? Does it create 10 times more value for your readers than it produces for you? This is one of those areas that I think it's easy to fall into the trap of, how much value am I going to get from creating a book, right? Like, what are all the things that I want to get, and how is it going to change my life? But you kind of have to let that go. Like you can think about it from the outset and be kind of strategic about it. But the reality is, let's say if you want to be a speaker and you want your book to provide you with speaking gigs or give you sort of a passport to get on stage, the reality is, if your book's any good, you're going to be getting speaking gigs for 10 years after you publish it. right? It's not going to instantly transform you and now you doing 50 gigs a year. Like that's just not going to happen unless it's for the, huge, or the small subset of books that sell millions and millions of copies. And even with those people, it's like they're probably already doing speaking.
Right. So it's not correlated necessarily that you get lots of speaking gigs from selling a lot of books, and the corollary or the opposite's true as well, right? So if you don't sell many books, you could still get lots of speaking gigs from a book that maybe sold fewer than 1,000 copies.
Possibly. Yeah, totally, actually. Yeah, it's like if you wrote a book for associations, for instance, and they were like, this is perfect. We want you to talk to us all over the country. That will beget so many speaking gigs that your calendar will just be totally full. I mean, a lot of this is like, I think people, and this is a disclaimer that I put in the article, is like a lot of people want to sell 1 million copies, and my ask is like, well, why? Because a lot of authors, all they want to do is just like enhance their business and get leads and maybe speak a bit more and elevate their credibility. And it's like, you don't need to sell 1 million copies if that's your goal. That's totally fine.
Well, isn't it an ego play? Like, I want to be 1 million copy bestseller. Is kind of like, I want to be a New York Times #1 bestseller. It's like a big ego thing.
Totally. That's fine. Just like know going into it that this is what I'm ultimately doing. Right. And I've talked with numerous authors who are like, yeah, this is something I've already won at business in many ways. This is my next mountain. I know it's a pure ego stroke. I get it. And in those cases, it's like, cool. Thank you for being honest and like understanding that. If you know that's what it is, then here's your path. And I think the reason your book has to be insanely valuable, and like people could describe it as insanely valuable. I think 4-Hour Workweek, Atomic Habits, like meet those criteria exceptionally well. It's not going to last very long unless it's so insanely valuable that people are keep referencing it. They keep bringing it up. It's, and that's test number 2. Will people talk about your book? And there's a bunch of criteria there. But it has to be a tip of the tongue,
right,
constant thing that they're like, I just keep finding myself talking about this book.
Even a decade later, like, for example, Tim Ferriss with the 4-Hour Workweek, there's insanely valuable content in there that has changed many people's lives, and concepts like lifestyle design is now part of the lexicon.
100%. And it was interesting. I don't want to necessarily put words in Tim's mouth, but this is what I remember him telling me at one point, which could be wrong, which was one of my goals with the book was, can I create 1,000 millionaires? And that's a really remarkable thing. And he has with that, And so when you put that kind of like very clear, and Tim's a very, very clear thinker, right? Very clear, smart goal around what the book transforms the reader into. Man, that's really remarkable.
Yeah. And when you say smart, like, you're using the acronym.
Yeah.
Specific, measurable, attainable,
achievable, or attainable.
Yeah. Realistic,
and time-based.
Yeah.
Will people talk about your book? Does it elevate their status? Do they feel confident every time they talk about it? One of the hamstringing things on my book is Play It Away, a workaholics cure for anxiety. Not a lot of people love to talk about anxiety, right?
It doesn't make them look good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I knew that was going to be a battle no matter what. So I tried to play it away. I tried to make it as palatable, but even then,
well, it's like imposter syndrome for dummies. Like, nobody wants to say, "Hey, this is a great book. It really is life-changing."
Yeah, you're not gonna necessarily run to post it. And so, like, what are the feelings? What are the emotional? What is it evoking when somebody's writing a post about it online? Are they like, "This is making me look so good," or is this kind of diminishing me in some way? Am I going to do this more than once? Probably not. All that stuff really matters. The number one sub question I ask about this is like, is your title attention grabbing, easy to remember, and fun to say out loud? because if they struggle with your title, there's this great book, and I still don't know what the title is, but I recommend it on a semi-regular basis. I probably recommend it half a dozen times a year. It's either called It's Not All About You, or It's Not All About Me, and I can never remember it. The cover is the worst cover I think I've ever seen, but it's written by somebody either from the CIA or FBI who wrote his book for his department on how he builds rapport so well that he flips people and turns them into informants. And the book is great. It's short. It's got these really good tips in it that are like, wow, yeah, this is wonderful. I can never remember the title of this book. I've never posted about it online, but I recommend it. It's called It's Not All About Me. It's by Robin Dreeke, and the cover looks like it was created in Microsoft Word, and it's just atrocious.
I see it now. That is atrocious. I think that is clip art.
It's like any government agency. I saw that type of art in the military. Not that I served, but I've been in military presentations, and it's just like they have no eye for design. They don't care.
That's funny.
So test 3, does your book transform the reader? Are they a different person from implementing it? Is it effective at creating the momentum and keeping them engaged, but also allowing them to stick with it so that they become the hero of their lives or their careers in some way, shape, or form? Test number 4. This one's a bit harder, but is this the right book at the right time? Mm-hmm. I think part of Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, for it selling tens of millions of copies, I'm sure at this point, big part of that was timing. It was really coming to the forefront of Americans and the globe's awareness of social media is a real problem. Kids are caring too much about what others think. We don't know an end in sight. And then he comes in with this really unique, fresh, kind of hip take on Buddhism and the art of only focus on the few things that actually matter to you and letting go of everything else. And starts with that great contrarian story about Charles Bukowski in the book. And so right book at the right time. It's difficult, but it's I think another great example is How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. It's his book came out right as that wave started to crest around, hey, mental health solutions are terrible and they're not working. And there's this new wave of psychedelics and alternative medicines that are showing promising results. Whatever your take on that is, doesn't really matter, right? It's the reality is that wave was cresting. And so he hit it right at the right time and established himself, hey, this is the go-to book on this topic. Same with books about Trump when, he was kind of at the height. It's anybody with an inside perspective on Trump is going to explode in popularity, but they'll fall off, right? So this is kind of one that is it makes a big difference, but it's not necessarily one I think that's worth shooting for, because books are evergreen. They should be. Will your book fit in with or create a cult following? My buddy James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, he did a really good job of thinking around what are the cult groups that are really going to identify strongly with this. And so he started off with CrossFit groups. Can your book be the Bible for a tight-knit group of people who are this is the ultimate, right? Stoicism is a good example of that as well. It's that wasn't necessarily a tight-knit group, but there are a lot of enthusiasts about Roman history and philosophy and stuff, and they congregate online. They talk about these principles, and they're pretty vocal. Some of them are super nerdy about it, much more than Ryan, right? They get caught up in the pedantics of different philosophies and everything. And so test number 6 is buying and gifting your book a no-brainer. Can people find it, stop quickly, impulse purchase it? Could it be given as a Christmas gift to somebody's entire family? Could it be given as a corporate gift to hundreds of employees? Could it be a go-to gift for years and years to come for the types of people that you consistently run into, right? I know Meditations by Marcus Aurelius has become this like go-to gifting book for both Ryan and Tim. And so they've probably given hundreds and hundreds of copies of that book. So could you think about, can I make my book into something that, a good example is Meetings Suck by Cameron Herold, right? Is like the brilliance of that book was not here's how to run a meeting. It was also here's how to effectively attend a meeting. So suddenly it became a book for everybody in the entire company, right? Same with books like Who Moved My Cheese, right? We're going to be facing change. We need to communicate this effectively to everybody and do it in a very simple, with a simple parable, a nice story that they can, okay, and now we're on board with change.
By the way, a great example, I think, of this is The Little Soul in the Sun. Anyone who is a parent would benefit by getting that book as a gift to read to their kid. It's the book by Neil Donald Walsh. I think I recommended it to you, didn't I?
Yeah, we have a copy. It's the books that you can see people consistently buying and giving over and over and over.
By the way, this category of business parable, pretty hot, right? Like the Who Moved My Cheese example that you gave is a business parable where it's got animals that are acting out a story and there's important business lessons being conveyed, a moral to the story. Is that something that's still hot, or has that really jumped the shark?
I think it'll always be hot. The E-Myth is an example, right? It's the same thing. The reality is, in like Fish, that book, that was a huge book a while back. The reality is like all it's doing is creating a hero's journey within the structure of business advice. We're putting business advice into a hero's journey. And so it's always going to be quote unquote hot. It's just a matter of, is it a good story or not? Right. And so there's a few different ways of tackling business books. If your book kind of forms a narrative with the flow of the chapters, right? If it kind of forms, you don't necessarily have to say, here's one story. In fact, most business books are written of like, they're made up of 20 stories, right? They're little stories. The chapter starts with, here's a story about Walt Disney. Next chapter, here's a story about Henry Ford or whatever. And it's moving to different ones to illustrate this broader point.
Because a fable does include animals in it to convey the story, but a parable is just a story that, like, Jesus used parables all the time to convey teaching points, but a fable actually uses animals to convey it.
I didn't know that distinction. I didn't know fables were always animals.
Animals, or I think also you can have plants or inanimate objects as the subjects or the characters.
No matter what structure you choose, you're going to require stories. And I think one of the biggest mistakes business authors make specifically is just neglecting the story, right? Neglecting a narrative and just saying, this is how to do the thing. This is how it works in my brain. I'm going to give people a manual. And it's like all the studies have shown people don't remember the how-to. They don't remember information. It's like, a few weeks later, 10% are going to remember it. But if you bake it into a story, over 60% are going to remember it. So story matters.
But how do you bake into, let's say, the art of SEO storytelling? That's really hard.
Yeah, right. It's a great question. In the chapter, especially the first chapter, you want to either create a sense of strong desire or total fear, because you have to grab the reader. And so you can't just go like, wouldn't it be nice to be number one on Google? It's like, you have to be like, I'll never forget waking up to 1,000 emails, being in a total state of panic or whatever. Like, there needs to be some sense of, oh my gosh, there's something really on the line, almost to the point where it feels like there could be a career death or an actual death. It's a huge, terrifying thing. You want to either create a sense of strong desire or total fear, because you have to grab the reader. And so you can't just go like, wouldn't it be nice to be number one on Google? It's like, you have to be like, I'll never forget waking up to 1,000 emails, being in a total state of panic or whatever. Like, there needs to be some sense of, oh my gosh, there's something really on the line, almost to the point where it feels like there could be a career death or an actual death. It's a huge, terrifying thing in a theater, and he describes himself like completely unable to pay attention to the movie, like in a total state of panic. And his wife is next to him like, are you okay? It feels like he's going to die as you're reading it. It's so important in that first chapter to grab them, having that type of a story. It's not optional, right? It's required at the beginning. You have to, because people are busy. They're distracted. There's a million. Look at all these books on my shelf. Like, I haven't read all of them. I haven't. I've read a lot of them, but like, I've picked up a number of them. If it doesn't grab me fast enough, So that's the reality. We're competing with everything on the planet, and TikTok is very entertaining. So is YouTube. So is, real life, nature.
Where does a book like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius grab you with a hair-raising story like that?
It's a great question. It is his background that gives, and the context of that book, that gives it the weight that it does. If it did not have Marcus Aurelius as the author, if it had a mid-manager at a local accounting firm making $60K a year, that book doesn't do anything, even if it's filled with the greatest wisdom. It was because it was Marcus Aurelius who was writing letters to himself with zero intention of sharing or publishing them to the world ever. That makes it remarkable. It has a story to it. And so the very act of recommending it requires a story. That's pretty remarkable, right? And it's the same with Goggins. This book is written by the world's toughest man, ex-Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL, went through Hell Week multiple times. And you just find yourself like vomiting out the story of David Goggins, right? And so you can't help yourself but sell the book.
How would you describe Marcus Aurelius to somebody who hasn't heard of him?
This is where I desperately want a lifeline and say, I'd like to call Ryan Holiday. He does a much better job at selling Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, but you're a reader. You're not the author. We're not having the author retell the story. We're having the reader. So it's got to be you.
Right. So Marcus Aurelius was considered one of the greatest leaders of all time.
A Roman emperor.
This is where I'm going to lean on you, Stephan, because I am not a self-identified Stoic. This was always kind of a weird point.
Me neither. I've not read the book, so I haven't read Ego is the what is it? Ego is the enemy, and The Obstacle is the Way, or what are some of other Ryan Holiday Stoicism books?
He did Stillness is Key, I believe. The Daily Stoic, yes, yeah.
Not read any of them. I haven't read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I feel certainly a connection with Marcus Aurelius. I feel like he's kind of up there in the heavens guiding me, among others, but I don't have kind of real world exposure to him from readings or teachings, YouTube videos, anything like that.
I didn't feel a strong connection to him too.
No, but I'm saying I feel a strong connection to him, even though I haven't had any real world exposure to him from his works. I feel like I do need to. That's on my list of things that I'm being guided to do. And I know I just recently found out that he was the Caesar, or the Roman emperor, who saved Judaism. And his best friend was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Anyway, so that was his best friend. And that was a big deal for somebody as powerful as him in the Roman Empire to have a Jewish rabbi in the time of the Romans were just on the brink of obliterating all Jews. And here he has his best friend as a very righteous, elevated rabbi. So that's one thing that just stuck out for me. Okay, this doesn't feel like just a name that has stuck with me for years. Marcus Aurelius, I'm not sure why. But okay, there's a purpose here. There's a reason I feel that kindredship. He's somebody that is like maybe I knew from past lives, or I don't know, he's like one of my guides or something.
I'm not as familiar with his teachings. I think I read Meditations in 2009. It's been a long time. And I don't really follow Stoicism. It's never resonated with me as hard, but it resonates with a lot of people, I think, where if you get emotionally turbulent, there's huge repercussions, right? There's a lot at stake. And so being able to remain within a certain range to be able to do your job and live your life on a steady, even keel and remain disciplined, I think those tend to be the folks that I've seen really gravitate to it and do well with the materials. There's another great book, that great leader. I think the book is called The Art of Leadership, and it's about Cyrus the Great, who was widely considered to be one of the greatest leaders of all time, because he would conquer nations, but make them better than when he conquered them. He was beloved, right? And so that book is really fascinating in that it breaks down, like, here's how he led. I don't know why that book didn't take off as much. I think there's more of a story with Marcus Aurelius. I also think there may be some xenophobic undertones with Americans maybe wouldn't gravitate as much to a Persian leader as they would to a Marcus Aurelius, but who knows? That book's great too. There's two final tests, and I'll wrap up on my kind of outline here. Test number 8 is, will you successfully market your book? There are books that have sold millions of copies that didn't have a launch, right? That weren't super well marketed, but it's like the marketing was baked so well into the book that it could market itself, right? And they had so many things going for it that it did well. I think the most impressive accomplishment I've ever seen in the world of book marketing is Gary Vaynerchuk selling 1 million copies of his book in 24 hours. That's like breaking the 3-minute mile. Every author who follows that stuff is like, what? It just didn't make sense. But the way he did it was really smart, which is like the next test. Will your book get massive distribution? And one of the sub questions I asked is there another product you can package your book with, which millions of people desperately want or need to buy? And what he did was, he didn't sell the book. He sold NFTs. He packaged his book in multiple copies with his book if you purchased the NFT, and then funneled the sales through whatever needed to be done. Those are the 9 tests, and you don't need to check off all of them. And I'm sure there are other ones that I'm missing, but those, over the years of studying kind of best-selling authors, books that sell millions of copies, I've just seen those come up time and time again. And that's my list.
That's awesome. We could maybe end with some sort of wisdom nugget that we haven't already talked about, and I'll just share one thing that just popped for me when I looked at your article just as we were talking, and that is, I love this: getting on Joe Rogan is not a strategy. I love that so much. And so maybe briefly riff on that for a minute, and then let's go to that wisdom nugget that you want to leave our listener with.
Yeah. All right. So I think a lot of people are kind of delusional, and it's like, it's one thing to have big goals and to like do the work necessary and strategically go about achieving them. Like, you could, in theory, absolutely get on Joe Rogan if you are the type of person that fits the type that he wants to invite onto his show. If you've done things that are interesting to him, absolutely, you can. But understand that press typically will not move that many copies. It just doesn't work that way anymore. There are definitely instances, yes, but it's rare. I have had friends be on Oprah Super Soul Sunday, sold less than 1,000 copies of their book. I have friends who've been on Good Morning America, sold less than 10 copies. Steve Harvey show, less than 10 copies, and it's like, these outlets are going to move the books for me. It just doesn't really work that way. The one that I've seen move a ton was Joe Rogan for David Goggins, because it was a perfect intersection of the right audience. But most importantly, Joe Rogan starts the show and in the first 30 seconds gives the book the best possible endorsement you could imagine. He's like, David Goggins, your book is effing awesome. First 3 seconds of the show, your book is effing awesome. It has been my running partner for the last week. It is effing amazing, man. He almost says that verbatim. You go listen to the show. And to start a show with that is like, okay, Joe Rogan just sold his entire audience. Buy that book, right? That's a wonderful endorsement. He's not going to do that for you. If you get on his show, like, you'd be lucky if he starts the show being like, hey, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you. You've written a book. Like, you're lucky if he acknowledges that you're an author, right? So not many outlets have that big of a following. I have seen TikTok move a lot of books, but like, that's a whole nother game to play in and of itself. It's got to be effective without context immediately. It's got to be a story. It's got to feel organic. It can't feel promotional at all. Like, I saw a teenager, she made a video about her dad, and it looks like her dad has no idea she's filming him, and maybe he didn't. But she's like, my dad has worked so hard on this book. He's such a sweet guy. I love him so much. And he came out with this book, and it's this clearly self-published book. And her dad just looks like this quirky, sweet guy, and it looks like he's completely oblivious to the fact that she's doing anything, right? And he's just just looks like a pleasant person. People loved that video. They thought it was so sweet. And the book hit #1 on Amazon overall. It sold probably tens of thousands of copies, at least thousands. That's not a million. It's not a million. Back in the day, I have a friend named Janine Roth, and I know her husband, Matt Weinstein. He told me this great story. She went on Oprah for the first time. She had just come out with a book. I can't remember what the book was. And Oprah showed the book and talked about how much she loved it. And the show producer turned to her and was like, you can go ahead and buy a new car now. And then Oprah said, I love this book so much, I'm giving it to everyone in the audience. The audience cheered. And he turns to him and he's like, you can go ahead and buy that place that you want, that second home that you wanted, basically. And it was like, Oprah at that time could call up a publisher and literally say, if you don't have 800,000 copies of this book in print ready to go, you are going to lose money. And they would be like, uh-oh, okay, Oprah, and go print off 800,000 copies of the book. And that was her influence. It's gone. It's gone. There's so many media channels now. So I know that was a really long answer. I think when it comes to marketing, I still believe the best move you can do is create the greatest product that you can, the best product that you possibly can, and have it be something that meets as many criteria that we talked about as you can, and just do your best to engineer it as a product that bursts with those qualities. A launch is great. You'll want to do a launch, but it's very easy. I've talked to hundreds of authors. It's very easy for them to stress about it. It's very easy for them to feel like a failure immediately after because, hey, my book dropped off the bestseller subcategory that it's in. I only got 40 reviews. People aren't buying it because now it's week 2 or 3. I need to sell more copies. And it's like, let it go, man. You just put something into humanity's consciousness. What an accomplishment. That book is a seed. Treat it like a baby that it is and let it go. It's going to grow up. It's going to take roots in society, into people's minds and into their lives in ways that you can never plan for or imagine.
The ripple effect is huge, more than we could possibly imagine. Just the kind word, the smile, helping a little old lady across the street. These sorts of things seem small, but they ripple out across universes.
Absolutely. I got a message from a guy who I've talked to twice. I got a video message, a 2-minute video message this weekend of him thanking me. He's like, I listened to Play It Away, and it's exactly what I went through. I just want to thank you. I'm playing with Legos again. I'm playing piano, taking care of myself. I got off these stimulants, modafinil, all this stuff. And he's like, I couldn't thank you enough. And it was as though I experienced that 11 years ago. I have no resonance with that experience right now, right? Because it was like, that was the thing that I went through. But it's fresh for people. And that's what I want to illustrate is like, you're creating a timeless artifact. Take the time to make it as great as you can. Take that time, but don't worry about it after you've released it. Like, just keep move on to the next one. Set up systems that market it. That's what I did with my books. Is I tried to just set up systems that would take care of it for decades to come, and I just let it go and I move on to the next thing. And don't worry about selling copies. Give away copies. Act like it's a tree, seeds for trees, and you're planting a forest. Like, it's cheap. It's the best content marketing you can do. Yeah, exactly. It gets cost prohibitive, but yeah, like, treat that thing as though you can just chuck it out and do so. It's a wonderful gift.
There's an expression, I forget where it comes from, but information wants to be free.
That would sound like Linus Torvalds or somebody who worked on open source stuff. So
this is fabulous. I love this conversation. So if our listener wanted to learn more from you, perhaps even work with you on a marketing strategy for their book, or to help them to, I don't know, up level in some fashion in their personal brand or their marketing, if you even have room in your schedule to take on any clients, how would they get in touch?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Just charliehoehn.com. There's a contact form, or my email's listed on there, charlie@hey.com, HEY.com. And just reach out, say hi, and we can potentially talk.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Charlie. It's been a pleasure, and
thank you, Stephan.
Keep revealing the light that you do in the world. And same to you, listener. Get out there and make it a beautiful week, and make it a beautiful life for everyone. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.